Hi guys, on to James 5 and then the conclusion of James, and then hopefully by the end of this you'll get a bigger picture of the gospel, because this is a nice short version of this, and it basically ties up with what Jesus was saying on the mount at the Sermon on the Mount. So number 1, he says, "Go to now, you rich men, weep and howl for your ministries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupt, and your garments are moth-eaten." And basically what he's saying there is, let me continue on to 3. "Your gold and silver is cankled, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days." And basically what he's saying is addressing the rich, warning them of impending judgment. He describes their wealth as rotten and their clothes as moth-eaten, symbolizing the decay of impermanence of material possessions. He also warns that their gold and silver will corrode, and this corrosion will testify against them, consuming their flesh like fire. He's emphasizing that wealth and material possessions are fleeting and can lead to spiritual decay. The rich are often so focused on their wealth that they often neglect their spiritual well-being. God will hold them accountable for their priorities and actions. On to verse 4. Verse 4, "Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is often kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. Ye have lived in pleasure on the earth, and been wanton. Ye have nourished your hearts, and as in a day of slaughter. Ye have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you." And what he's saying there is, he condemns the rich for withholding wages from the laborers, which is a violation of biblical principles. He points out that God is aware of the laborers' cries and will hold the rich accountable. James criticizes the rich for living in luxury and indulgence, fattening their own hearts while neglecting the needs of others. He accuses the rich of condemning and murdering the righteous who do not resist the oppression. He emphasizes that exploiting poor and vulnerable is a serious sin. God is a God of justice and will ultimately hold the oppressors accountable. On to verse 7, he says, "Be patient therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruits of the earth, and have long patience for it, until he receives the early and latter rain. Be ye also patient, establish your hearts, and the coming of the Lord dwelleth nigh. Grudge not one against another, brethren, lest ye be condemned. Behold, the judge standeth at the door." And what he's saying there is he's encouraging believers to be patient until the Lord returns. He uses the illustration of a farmer waiting for the harvest, emphasizing the importance of waiting patiently. Urges believers to establish their hearts as the Lord's return is imminent. He warns against grumbling against one another, as this can lead to condemnation. Patience and perseverance are essential virtues for believers. The Lord's return is certain and imminent. Believers should focus on their relationship with God rather than complaining about one another. He points out that the judge, God, is always near, watching and waiting to render judgment. On to verse 10, he says, "Take my brethren the prophets, who have spoken in the name of the Lord, for an example of suffering affliction and of patience. Behold, we count them happy which endureth. Ye have heard of the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord. The Lord is a very pitiful and of tender mercy." And basically what he's saying there is, he's encouraging us to consider the prophets as examples of suffering and patience. He notes that the prophets endure suffering and were ultimately blessed. He specifically highlights the example of Job, who persevered in the face of great suffering. He emphasizes that the Lord is compassionate and merciful, and that he ultimately intends good for his people. He is emphasizing that believers can learn from the examples of prophets, and Job's suffering and perseverance are an inevitable part of the Christian life. God is sovereign and has a good purpose in allowing suffering. God is compassionate and merciful and will ultimately bring good out of suffering. Verse 12. But above all things, my brethren, swear not, neither by heaven, neither by the earth, neither any other oath, but let your yea be yea, and your nay, nay, lest ye fall into condemnation. And that is a quite long one where he explains. He says, he's warning against taking oaths or swearing. He specifies that this includes swearing by heaven, earth, or anything else. Instead, he encourages believers to be truthful and straightforward in their speech. He emphasizes that this means saying yes when you mean yes and no when you mean no. He is emphasizing that taking an oath can lead to judgment and condemnation. Truthfulness and honesty are essential for believers. Our words should be reliable and trustworthy. We should avoid using oaths and swearing, and instead focus on being truthful and straightforward in all our interactions. And then on to verse 13. Is any among you afflicted? Let him pray. Is any merry? Let him sing psalms. Is any sick among you? Let him call for the elders of the church, and let them pray over him, anointing him with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer of the faith shall save the sick, and the Lord shall raise him up, and if he have committed sins, they shall be forgiven him. And what he's saying there is, he's encouraging believers to pray when they are suffering. He also encourages those who are cheerful to express their joy through singing psalms. He instructs those who are sick to call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil. He promises that the prayer of the faithful will save the sick, and the Lord will raise them up. He also notes that if the sick person has committed sin, he will be forgiven. He is emphasizing that prayer is a powerful tool to believers in all circumstances. The church should be involved in caring for the sick and the suffering. Healing and forgiveness are available through prayer and faith. The elders of the church have a role in ministering to the sick and the suffering. Singing psalms is a way of expressing joy and praise to God. Remember, King David did the same thing. He sang psalms in his head, and that is, by the way, how you keep your mind from wandering all kinds of places. Confess your faults one to another, and pray one for another, that ye may be healed. The effectual servant prayer of the righteous man availeth much. And what that verse 16 says is, he's encouraging believers to confess their sins one to another. He instructs them to pray for one another so that they may be healed. He highlights the power of servant power, stating that prayer of a righteous person is effective and accomplishes much. He's emphasizing that confession and prayer are essential for healing and restoration. Believers should be accountable for one another and share their struggles. On to verse 17, and he says, Elias was a man subject to like passions as we are, and he prayed earnestly that it might not rain, and it rained not on the earth by the space of 3 years and 6 months. And he prayed again, and the heavens gave rain, and the earth brought forth her fruit. Brethren, if any of thou do err from the truth, and one convert him, let him know that he which converteth the sinner from the error of his ways shall save a soul from death, and shall hide a multitude of sins. And what he's saying there is, he's using Elias as an example of a person with a similar nature to ours who prayed fervently and effectively. Elias' prayers was so powerful that he stopped rain for 3.5 years and then brought forth rain again. He encourages believers to turn back those who have wandered from the truth. He promises that if someone returns a sinner from their error, they will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. And that concludes James. And I'm hoping that you can see that this resonates with what Jesus was saying in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And that's the principle of the whole Bible. And every single prophet, every single book has a similar message. James is a shorter version, and it was a bit quicker to explain. And it's also, I think, God asked me to describe this specific one. Hope this message gets through.